Millionaire marries a fake bride to satisfy his ailing mother, but her one rule changes everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin and steady against the windows of Carter Enterprises' glass tower. Inside, under the cold light of the city, Ethan Carter sat behind his desk, motionless. The phone on his desk still echoed with the voice of his mother's doctor, the words looping in his head like a cruel echo. Her heart is failing. She wants to see you settled before the surgery. He stared at the silver pen in his hand, the same one he had signed billion-dollar deals with, but today his power felt useless. The thought of losing his mother, the only person who had ever seen the boy beneath the title, terrified him. She believed he was already engaged, a lie he had invented months ago to stop her from worrying. Now, with time running out, he needed to make that lie real. The door opened quietly. His assistant stepped in, nervous. "Sir, Miss Lena Hayes is here for the Art Foundation interview." Ethan looked up, eyes sharp with an idea forming. "Send her in." Lena entered, clutching a worn leather folder against her chest. Her dress was neat but clearly second-hand. She smiled politely, unaware of the storm waiting behind his calm expression. Ethan studied her for a long moment. She was young, honest-looking, the kind of woman his mother would trust instantly. "Miss Hayes," he began, voice steady, "I am going to offer you something unconventional." She frowned slightly. "Unconventional?" "Yes," he said, standing. "Marry me." The room went silent except for the hum of the rain. Lena blinked, thinking she had misheard. "Excuse me?" Ethan walked around the desk, his tone as measured as if he were discussing a merger. "My mother is very ill. She believes I am engaged. If she learns the truth, it could break her heart. I need someone to play the role of my wife officially, for a short time." Lena's throat tightened. "You are asking me to pretend to be your wife?" "Exactly," he said. "It will be a legal marriage, with a contract protecting both sides. You will receive financial compensation, enough to fund your art school for underprivileged children." Her pulse quickened. The offer was absurd, yet the mention of her students made her heart ache. "Why me?" Ethan's gaze softened for the first time. "Because when you spoke in your interview about giving children a place to feel seen, you meant it. You are not the kind of woman who lies easily." The rain intensified outside, tracing silver lines down the glass. Lena took a slow breath, her voice trembling but firm. "If I agree, there will be one rule." Ethan raised a brow. "Which is?" She met his eyes. "You will not lie to your mother, about me or about us." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Deal." And with that single word, a contract colder than love and warmer than either of them expected began. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows of Ethan Carter's office. The city outside was still damp from the night's rain, its glass towers glinting like cold mirrors. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the previous night. The tension had not faded, it had only changed its shape. Lena Hayes sat across from Ethan, her posture straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. A single document lay open between them. It was printed on crisp white paper, bound with a gold clip. At the top, in sharp letters, it read, "Marriage Agreement. Confidential." Ethan's attorney, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, adjusted his glasses and began to read. His voice was steady, emotionless, like a machine reciting terms of a deal. "The agreement will remain valid for 3 months. During this period, Miss Lena Hayes will legally act as Mrs. Lena Carter in the presence of the public, family, and media. After this term, either party may file for annulment with no legal or financial consequence." Lena's eyes moved over each line. Every clause felt heavier than the last. Clause 1. No physical intimacy required. Clause 2. Maintain discretion at all times. Clause 3. Attend public events as a married couple when requested. Clause 4. Do not interfere in the other's personal affairs. The words looked sterile, harmless. Yet every one of them seemed to drain warmth from the air. When the lawyer finished, Ethan spoke quietly. You will be compensated fairly, enough to reopen your art school and keep it running for several years. Lena inhaled slowly. You mean, enough to make this lie worth it? Ethan met her gaze without flinching. You can call it a lie if you want. I call it a way to protect someone I love. Oh? For a moment, silence filled the room except for the faint ticking of a clock. Then Lena reached for the pen, hesitated, and lowered it again. There is one thing missing. Ethan frowned slightly. What is that? She flipped the final page to the bottom margin and wrote a single sentence in neat, deliberate handwriting. He must not lie to his mother about me. Or about us. When she looked up, her eyes were steady. This is my only condition. Ethan stared at the words, then at her. You are making honesty part of a fake marriage. Lena's tone was quiet but firm. Because the truth still matters, even in a lie. For the first time, his expression softened. He picked up the pen and signed his name with a single stroke. Then it is settled. The lawyer gathered the documents, nodded stiffly, and left the office, closing the heavy door behind him. The room felt strangely empty. Lena stood, unsure what to say. Ethan moved toward the window, the city skyline reflected in the glass behind him. My driver will take you to the tailor at 4 o'clock. You will need a ring and a dress before the ceremony. She blinked. So soon? My mother's condition is worsening, he said quietly. We do not have much time. That afternoon, Lena sat in a private fitting room, surrounded by mirrors and silk. A seamstress measured her shoulders and whispered instructions to an assistant. The white dress hung beside her, elegant but simple, nothing like the gowns she had imagined as a child. It was beautiful, but it was not hers. She looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection did not show a bride. It showed a woman about to enter a cage she had chosen herself. By evening, a chauffeur escorted her to a private chapel inside Street Helena's hospital. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and lilies. Ethan was already there, dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression composed but unreadable. In the front pew sat his mother, Mrs. Margaret Carter, a frail woman with kind eyes dimmed by illness. When she saw Lena, her face lit up with joy. Oh, you must be Lena, she said softly, reaching out her hand. Thank you for making my son happy. Lena knelt beside her, taking the woman's hand gently. It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Carter. Ethan's eyes flickered, watching them. For the first time in years, his mother was smiling a real, effortless smile. The ceremony began quietly. The only sounds were the soft hum of the chapel lights and the rhythmic beeping of a monitor from the next room. There were no guests, no music, no flowers, only vows spoken like lines in a contract. I, Ethan Carter, take you, Lena Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Lena repeated the words, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It was simple gold, cold against her skin. Mrs. Carter clapped her hands weakly, her eyes glistening. You two look perfect together, she whispered. Please, take care of each other. Lena smiled, though a tear burned at the corner of her eye. I promise, she said softly, though in her heart, she was not sure what she was promising anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights glowed like scattered stars. As they walked out of the hospital, Ethan held the door open, his expression unreadable. Our agreement starts now. Lena looked up at him, her hand brushing the gold band on her finger. And ends when the truth does. Neither of them realized that the truth, from that moment, had already begun to change. The following morning arrived with a pale light that struggled to break through the overcast sky. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of damp earth and asphalt. The city outside moved as usual, loud and indifferent. But inside the Carter estate, time seemed to move slower, heavier. Lena woke in a room that could have been inside a museum. The ceiling arched high above her with crown molding carved in delicate floral patterns. The bed was enormous, the sheets crisp and white, and the windows overlooked a wide lawn bordered by trimmed hedges and stone statues. It was beautiful, but it did not feel alive. She sat up, still wearing the gold ring on her finger. It caught the morning light and shimmered faintly, like a reminder of something both unreal and permanent. Her suitcase sat unopened at the foot of the bed. She had not unpacked. Part of her could not accept that this room now belonged to her, even temporarily. A soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Carter?" a voice called politely. "Breakfast is served in the dining hall." Lena hesitated at the title, Mrs. Carter. It did not feel like her name. Still, she stood, straightened her dress, and followed the voice through the long marble hallway. The dining room stretched nearly the length of a small apartment. A chandelier hung above the table, its crystals throwing fragments of light across polished wood. Ethan sat at the far end, dressed in a gray suit, already reading through morning reports. He looked perfectly at ease, as though yesterday's ceremony had been nothing more than another business transaction. "Good morning," Lena said quietly as she took the seat opposite him. He looked up briefly, nodded once, then returned to his papers. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as someone can in a stranger's house," she replied, forcing a polite smile. His lips curved slightly, but not into a smile. "It will not feel strange for long. The staff will assist you with anything you need. There are household rules on the sideboard." She followed his gaze to a neatly bound manual beside the silver coffee pot. "You have rules for everything," she murmured. "It keeps order," he answered simply. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the soft clink of porcelain and the quiet hum of the morning news on a nearby television. The silence between them was not hostile, only dense, filled with all the words neither dared to speak. Then Ethan folded the newspaper and set it aside. "My mother wants to have dinner with us tonight. It would mean a great deal to her if you joined." Lena nodded. "Of course. She likes conversation," he added, his tone softening a little. "And she believes that you are the reason I seem happier lately. You have made her smile again. Thank you for that." Lena blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "You are welcome," she said quietly. "But she smiles because she loves you. She just wants to see you live." His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment the businessman vanished. There was only a son, tired and afraid of losing, the one person who made him human. Then the moment passed. He straightened his tie and stood. "I will see you tonight, Mrs. Carter." After breakfast, Lena wandered through the mansion, exploring its endless corridors. Every corner held something expensive, a painting, a sculpture, a vase, yet none of it felt personal. It was a house that displayed wealth but hid emotion. In the library, she paused before a wall of books and trailed her fingers across the spines. Most were about economics, leadership, or architecture. One slim volume caught her attention. It was a sketchbook, old and half-filled with pencil drawings. She opened it and found portraits of a woman smiling beside a small boy. Beneath one sketch, written in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "For Mom, so she never feels alone." Lena closed the book gently. The boy in the drawing could only have been Ethan. The discovery softened something in her chest. When evening came, the mansion transformed under warm golden light. The dining table was set for 3, and Mrs. Carter sat at the head, her frail frame wrapped in a shawl. She looked radiant, her face glowing with happiness when she saw them enter together. "Come sit, my dear," she said to Lena. "It is so good to have another woman in this house. It feels like home again." Ethan helped his mother with her napkin and took the seat beside Lena. The staff served roasted chicken, fresh bread, and soup. The simple meal felt strangely intimate. Mrs. Carter asked questions eagerly, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Lena, what kind of art do you teach?" "I teach children how to draw what they feel, not just what they see," Lena replied. "It helps them understand their emotions." "That is beautiful," Mrs. Carter said, her smile soft. Then she turned to Ethan. "You could learn from that, son. You spend too much time thinking and not enough feeling." Ethan laughed quietly. "You may be right, Mother." Lena watched them, and for the first time, she saw him laugh, not the polite kind used at meetings, but a small, real laugh. It changed his face completely. When dinner ended, Mrs. Carter excused herself to rest. Before leaving, she took Lena's hand. "You have brought warmth back into this house," she whispered. "Promise me you will not let it fade." "Oh," Lena nodded, her throat tightening. "I promise." Later, as Ethan walked her back through the hallway, he said quietly. You handled that well. My mother adores you already. Lena smiled faintly. That is what we wanted, is it not? Yes, he said, though the word came slower than before. That is exactly what we wanted. She paused at her door. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Lena. When she entered her room, she leaned against the closed door, exhaling deeply. Somewhere down the hall, she heard the faint sound of a piano, a melody played hesitantly, as if the player had forgotten how to finish. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, carrying with it the echo of a house beginning, at last, to feel like home. Days passed quietly inside the Carter mansion. The world outside continued its restless pace. But within those marble walls, life followed a slower rhythm, one shaped by silence, routine, and unspoken rules. Each morning, Lena took breakfast alone in the sunroom, surrounded by tall glass panels that overlooked the garden. She had started watering the plants herself, a task the staff found unnecessary, but she insisted on doing. There was comfort in it, in touching something alive amid so much polished stone and glass. Ethan left early every day, always in a dark suit, always with the same brisk tone when he said goodbye. The driver will be waiting at 6. Then the echo of the closing door, and the house returned to stillness. Sometimes she heard Mrs. Carter's laughter drifting from her room when the nurses came to visit. Lena often joined her, reading aloud or showing sketches of flowers from the garden. Mrs. Carter adored her gentle nature and her quiet humor, often saying, "You are the kind of peace this house has not known for a very long time." But Lena felt the peace was fragile. There was something under the surface, something unsaid between her and Ethan that neither of them dared to touch. One evening, just before sunset, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. The sky was painted in soft gold as he stepped into the garden, loosening his tie. He found Lena kneeling by the fountain, her hands covered in soil. She looked up in surprise. "You are home early," she said, brushing her palms against her skirt. "I finished work sooner than expected," he replied, watching her for a moment. "You like it here, do you not?" She smiled faintly. "It feels more real out here than anywhere else in the house." He nodded slowly. "My mother used to say the same thing. She planted those roses before my father passed away." Lena glanced at the rose bushes glowing softly in the fading light. "They are beautiful. They look cared for." "I used to take care of them when I was a child," Ethan said quietly. "Then I stopped." "Why?" "Because work became easier than grief." The honesty in his voice startled her. For a moment, he looked not like the confident businessman she had met, but like the boy in the old sketchbook she had found, the one who drew pictures for his mother, so she would not feel alone. Lena wanted to say something comforting, but before she could, a voice called from the terrace. "Mr. Carter, dinner is ready." Ethan's expression returned to its composed calm. "Shall we?" The dining table was set as always, perfectly arranged. Yet that night the meal felt different. There were only the two of them, and the silence was softer, no longer heavy. As they ate, Lena noticed the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "You work too much," she said quietly. He looked up, half amused. "That is the first complaint I have received in weeks." "It is not a complaint. It is a concern," she replied, her tone gentle. "Your mother worries." He sighed. "My mother worries about everything. She thinks love can fix what discipline built." "Maybe she is right," Lena said softly. "Maybe they are not opposites." For the first time, he smiled, truly smiled, and it changed the air between them. After dinner, Mrs. Carter joined them briefly in the living room, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She insisted they sit together on the couch while she looked through an old photo album. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a faded picture of a young Ethan at a piano recital. "He was so nervous that day." Lena leaned closer, studying the photo. "You played piano?" Ethan chuckled quietly. "I did, but only because she made me. I have not touched one in years." Mrs. Carter's eyes twinkled. "You should play again. Maybe your wife can convince you." Lena blushed lightly but smiled. "Maybe one day." Mrs. Carter patted her hand. "You two remind me of how his father and I used to be. Quiet, but deeply connected." The words lingered long after Mrs. Carter went to bed. Ethan stood by the fireplace, staring at the flicker of the flames. "My father died when I was 17, he said without turning. "He built this company from nothing. He wanted me to be like him, strong, decisive, unshakable. I think I became everything he wanted, except human. Lena approached slowly. Being strong does not mean being unfeeling. He looked at her then, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. You talk like you have never been afraid. I am afraid every day, she admitted. Afraid of losing what I care about. Afraid of being seen as something I am not. But fear is not the worst thing. Pretending you do not have it is worse. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read something he could not define. Then he nodded once. You are right. The grandfather clock struck 9, its chime echoing softly through the hall. Ethan straightened his jacket. You should rest. Tomorrow my mother wants us to attend a small luncheon at the hospital board. It will help strengthen the illusion of our marriage. The illusion, Lena repeated quietly. Sometimes I forget that is what this is. He paused, his gaze steady on her. Do you? Lena met his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes. Ethan did not respond. He only gave a brief nod and walked toward the door. When he was gone, the silence returned, but it felt different, warmer, uncertain, like the pause before something inevitable. She sat by the fire for a long time, watching the embers fade to ash. Somewhere deep inside, a truth began to grow small, fragile, and unstoppable. Outside, the wind rustled through the roses in the garden, scattering a few petals across the path. Inside the mansion, two hearts that had once agreed to nothing but a contract began to rewrite the terms on their own. The following week unfolded under a rhythm that felt almost natural, though both Ethan and Lena knew their marriage was anything but. The days followed an ordered pattern, mornings filled with meetings and errands, afternoons with quiet meals shared in the sunroom, and evenings when the house glowed softly under the light of chandeliers. Yet, something unseen had begun to shift. Lena had grown close to Mrs. Carter, who now spent more time downstairs. Together they painted in the garden whenever the weather allowed. The older woman had taken to sketching the roses that surrounded the fountain, her thin hands trembling slightly, but steadying when Lena guided them. You have such a calming presence, she would say. I wish Ethan would slow down long enough to see what you bring to this home. One afternoon, while Mrs. Carter napped in her chair, Lena stayed beside her sketchbook. She drew quietly the outline of the mansion, the shape of the fountain, and two figures sitting side by side on the bench. She shaded in the details until it almost looked alive. When she finished, she signed her initials in the corner and placed it on the nightstand near Mrs. Carter's bed. Upstairs, Ethan stood on the balcony, observing them through the window. He had returned early from a board meeting and paused before entering. The sight of Lena's patience with his mother stirred something unexplainable inside him. It was not obligation. It was not gratitude. It was something warmer, something that made his pulse shift. When he entered the garden, Lena looked up and smiled faintly. You are home early again. I wanted to check on both of you, he said. Mother looks better. She is stronger every day, Lena replied. I think she just needed hope more than medicine. Ethan nodded, glancing at his mother. You give her that. They walked together along the path of roses. The late afternoon sun made the petals glow like small embers. Lena's dress brushed lightly against the flowers as she walked. Ethan spoke first. The hospital luncheon is tomorrow. It will be public, and there will be reporters. You should be prepared. She looked uncertain. What do I need to do? Just be yourself, he said. People already adore you. That is more than I can say for myself. She smiled softly. You think too little of yourself. I think accurately, he answered. But there was a flicker of humor in his tone that surprised them both. The next day, the luncheon was held at the hospital's main hall. The crowd buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional flash of cameras. Ethan's presence drew attention, but the room quieted when he entered with Lena by his side. She wore a pale blue dress that matched the color of a clear morning sky, and for the first time, Ethan noticed that her calmness outshone the wealth around them. Mrs. Carter sat near the front, smiling proudly. The hospital director greeted the guests and spoke about the foundation's work. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he walked to the podium with his usual poise. My mother taught me that generosity begins at home, he said, his voice steady. But I only learned its meaning again recently. He paused, his eyes meeting Lena's for a fraction of a second. Sometimes kindness reminds us of who we were before ambition took everything else. Applause followed, but Lena's heart beat faster for reasons she could not name. When the event ended, several people came to greet them. Among them was Mr. W. Graham, Ethan's chief financial officer, whose polite smile never reached his eyes. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "You certainly know how to win over a crowd. And Mrs. Carter, what a pleasant surprise. You are even more charming in person." There was something in his tone that made Lena uneasy. Ethan noticed too. "Thank you, Graham," he said evenly. "Enjoy the evening." As they walked away, Lena whispered, "He does not seem to like me." "He does not like anyone he cannot control," Ethan replied. "Ignore him." But Ethan could not ignore the unease that lingered after the encounter. He knew Graham was loyal to profit above all else, and the man had never approved of distractions in leadership. The idea that Graham might see Lena as a weakness unsettled him. That night, back at the mansion, the sky darkened with an approaching storm. Rain drummed against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Mrs. Carter had retired early, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the living room. A fire burned low in the hearth, its orange glow dancing across the polished floor. Lena sat near the piano, her hands tracing the edge of the keys. "Your mother told me you used to play," she said quietly. "Will you play something now?" He hesitated. "It has been years." "Then let the piano remember for you," she said, offering a gentle smile. Ethan took a slow breath, sat beside her, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes came uncertainly, but soon the melody found its shape, a soft, mournful tune that filled the room like a whispered confession. Lena closed her eyes, listening. The sound was fragile, sincere, and utterly human. When he finished, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Lena spoke softly. "That was beautiful." He looked at her, his voice low. "I used to play for my mother when she could not sleep. It was the only time the house felt alive." "It feels alive now," she said. He held her gaze for a moment too long, then stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "It is late. You should rest." "Oh." Lena rose slowly, her pulse still unsteady from the closeness of the moment. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Lena," he said, though his voice sounded different, softer, uncertain. As she walked down the hall toward her room, the echo of the piano lingered behind her, blending with the rhythm of the rain. She touched the ring on her finger, the symbol of a contract that had begun to feel less like duty and more like the fragile beginning of something neither of them dared to name. And somewhere in the quiet house, Ethan Carter stood alone before the fire, realizing that the walls he had built to protect himself had started to crack, not from force, but from kindness. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the air crisp and cool. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Carter mansion, soft and golden after the long night of rain. The house seemed unusually still, as if it too were catching its breath. Lena woke earlier than usual. She went downstairs quietly, barefoot on the polished floor, and found the living room still faintly smelling of smoke from the dying fire. The piano sat open, a few keys slightly pressed, as if the music still lingered there. She ran her fingertips lightly across them and smiled. The sound from the night before had not left her mind. In the kitchen, Mrs. Carter was already awake, sitting at the small breakfast table with a wool shawl draped around her shoulders. "Good morning, dear," she said warmly. "You look brighter today." Lena poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. "It feels like the storm washed everything clean." Mrs. Carter chuckled softly. "Storms do that. They frighten us first, then they remind us what peace feels like after." She studied Lena for a moment. "You and Ethan stayed downstairs late last night, did you not?" Lena hesitated, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "He played the piano, that is all." "Ah, Mrs. Carter said knowingly. "He has not touched that instrument since his father passed. You must have done something right." Lena smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. Before she could, Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie undone. He looked more human than usual, less polished, but somehow warmer. "Good morning," he said, his tone softer than before. "Good morning, Ethan," his mother replied cheerfully. "Lena made your favorite tea." Ethan looked surprised. "She did?" Lena handed him the cup. "Your mother told me once that you like chamomile in the morning." He took it, his expression unreadable. "Thank you." For a brief moment, the three of them sat together, the aging mother, the reserved son, and the woman who was neither stranger nor wife, sharing a silence that felt strangely complete. Later that afternoon, after Ethan left for his office, Lena joined Mrs. Carter in the garden. The sun was warm, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses. Mrs. Carter painted slowly, her brush moving with the patience of someone who had learned to find beauty in small things. "You have changed him," Mrs. Carter said suddenly, without looking up. Lena looked startled. "I do not think I have that kind of power." "You do not need power to change someone," the older woman said gently. "You only need presence. Ethan has lived surrounded by people who wanted something from him. You are the first who simply wanted him to be kind." Lena's gaze softened. "He is kind, even when he hides it." Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "Then do not let him forget it." That evening, Lena was in the study sorting through papers related to a charity event when Ethan returned. He paused at the doorway, watching her. The setting sun cast an amber glow over the room, and for a moment, she looked like she belonged there, as though the house had been waiting for her all along. "You are working," he said quietly. "I was helping your mother organize donations for the art therapy wing," she said, glancing up with a small smile. "She says it was your father's idea years ago." Ethan stepped closer. "It was. He wanted to build something lasting. Something that healed." "That sounds like you," she said. He shook his head slightly. "No, I build things that make money, not meaning." Lena set the papers aside. "You could do both." "Oh, quote." He met her eyes, and for a moment, the air between them changed. "You believe that, do you not?" "I have to," she replied softly. "Otherwise, nothing I do would make sense." Ethan looked down, his voice lower. "Lena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really agree to this arrangement? It cannot just be for the money." She paused, searching for the truth. "It started that way. But then I saw your mother's eyes when she talked about you. I saw how lonely she was, and I thought, maybe this could matter to someone. Maybe I could matter." He said nothing for a while. Then he exhaled slowly. "You do." The words were quiet but heavy, and they hung in the air long after he left the room. That night, the house was quiet again. Lena walked past the closed doors, past the portraits, and found herself in the music room. The piano gleamed in the moonlight. She pressed one key lightly, letting the note ring out. It felt like a heartbeat. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Could not sleep?" "Not yet," she said. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not." He stepped closer, standing beside her. "Do you want me to play again?" Lena smiled softly. "Only if you want to." He sat, his fingers brushing the keys. The melody this time was lighter, gentler, something between memory and hope. She stood beside him, her hand resting on the edge of the piano. For a while, they simply existed there, two people sharing silence, shaped by sound. When the music faded, Ethan turned slightly toward her. "Lena," he said, his voice low. "This, whatever it is, it feels real sometimes." She met his eyes, her heart unsteady. "Then maybe it is." Neither of them spoke after that. They just sat together in the quiet, the fire from the nearby hearth painting soft light across their faces. The storm outside had passed days ago, but inside the house, something far more dangerous had begun, the kind of quiet that only love can create, and only truth can survive. The following evening brought a subtle tension that neither Ethan nor Lena could name. The mansion glowed under soft amber lights, polished floors reflecting the warmth of the chandeliers. Yet beneath the calm, there was an undercurrent of nervousness, as though both of them sensed something fragile hanging in the air. Dinner that night was quieter than usual. Mrs. Carter had retired early due to fatigue, leaving Ethan and Lena alone at the long dining table. The space between them felt longer than it was, filled with unspoken thoughts and half-finished sentences. The gentle clinking of silverware became the only sound in the room. Ethan set down his glass and broke the silence. "You have been quiet tonight," he said. Lena looked up from her plate. "So have you." He gave a faint smile. "Fair enough. I suppose we are running out of small talk." "I think we passed small talk weeks ago," she said softly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "My mother asked me today if I love you." Her hand froze on the table, her heart giving a quick, startled beat. "What did you tell her?" Ethan's eyes flickered, uncertain. I told her that what we have is complicated, that love is not part of the agreement. Lena nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. And did you believe that when you said it? He hesitated. I wanted to. Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. The fire in the nearby hearth crackled faintly, the only witness to the shift between them. Lena pushed her chair back and stood. Your mother is recovering, she said softly. Maybe the agreement has already served its purpose. Ethan looked up sharply. You want to end it? I do not know what I want, she admitted. But I do not want to live in something that feels half real. He rose from his seat as well, his voice lower now. You think it is easy for me? I built my entire life around control. Then you walked in and turned everything into chaos. Chaos can be good, she said. It means something is alive. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is, she whispered. Before he could reply, a faint cough came from the hallway. They both turned to see Mrs. Carter standing there, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. I am sorry, she said with a gentle smile. I did not mean to interrupt. I just wanted to see you two together. Ethan quickly walked over to her. Mother, you should be resting. She waved a frail hand. Do not worry about me. Seeing you two here makes me feel stronger. She looked at Lena and reached for her hand. Thank you for bringing laughter back to this house. Lena squeezed her hand gently. You make it easy to care for you. Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. Then promise me something, both of you. Promise that you will not waste time being proud. Life is too short for walls. Neither of them answered right away, but the message lingered long after she went back to her room. Later that night, Lena found herself in the study again, sorting through sketches for the art foundation. The rain had started once more, tapping softly against the tall windows. She did not hear Ethan enter until he spoke. My mother said something tonight that I cannot stop thinking about. Lena turned. He stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his hair slightly damp from the rain. What did she say? That we build walls around our hearts and call them safety, he said quietly. Maybe she is right. Lena looked down at her hands. Walls keep us from getting hurt. They also keep us from feeling alive, he replied. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. You know, he said, when I was a child, my mother used to tell me stories about my father. She said he was never afraid of feeling too much. I think I spent my entire life trying to be the opposite of him. But lately, I am not sure I want to be that man anymore. Lena's voice was soft. You do not have to decide who you are tonight. He turned to her, his expression tender but conflicted. You make it sound easy again. I make it sound possible, she said. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tiredness behind his eyes, the quiet storm he always carried. Lena, he said, his voice low. This, whatever it is between us, it feels more real than anything I have known in years. But it also scares me more than anything ever has. She nodded slowly. Then we are both scared. Something passed between them, neither spoken nor fully hidden. He reached out as if to touch her face, but stopped himself. The hesitation itself said more than words could. I should go, she whispered. He nodded but did not move. Good night, Lena. Good night, Ethan. As she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing faintly on the marble floor, she felt the weight of every word they had not said pressing against her chest. In his study, Ethan remained by the window, staring at the rain. He felt the warmth of her presence even in her absence, and for the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, not as a businessman, not as a son, but simply as a man. If what began as a contract had already become something worth fighting for. The rain outside softened into mist, wrapping the mansion in quiet. Inside, two people lay awake in separate rooms, listening to the same storm, caught between duty and something dangerously close to love. The next day began with a quiet tension that seemed to settle over the mansion like morning fog. The air carried the faint smell of rain from the night before, and the garden glistened with dew. Lena woke early, restless from a night filled with dreams she could not fully remember. When she opened her eyes, she felt a strange mix of peace and unease, like standing between two worlds, one real and one she had only imagined. Downstairs, the house staff moved softly, preparing breakfast. She found Mrs. Carter in the sunroom, wrapped in a blanket, watching the garden. "You are up early," the older woman said, smiling weakly. I could not sleep, Lena admitted, pouring her tea. Mrs. Carter's eyes sparkled with gentle understanding. Neither could I. There is something in the air, do you feel it? Change, perhaps. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Something is different. Before they could continue, Ethan appeared in the doorway, still dressed casually in a shirt and vest. His usual stiffness seemed replaced with something lighter. Good morning, he said, his voice even. Mrs. Carter looked up. Good morning, dear. You both look far too serious for a morning this beautiful. Ethan gave a small smile. We will try to look happier, Mother. After breakfast, he suggested a walk in the garden. The sun had risen high enough to warm the stone paths, and the roses were in full bloom, their petals shining with droplets of water. Lena walked beside him, her hands clasped loosely before her. For the first time, she noticed that he was not carrying his phone or wearing his watch. You left your work behind today, she said. Just for a few hours, he replied. Mother's doctor called this morning. Her test results look good. Better than expected. Lena stopped walking, her expression brightening. That is wonderful news. It is, he said, glancing toward the house. I do not think I realized how much I have been holding my breath waiting to hear that. She smiled softly. Maybe now you can breathe again. He turned to her, his tone quieter. And what about you? Will you breathe easier once the agreement ends? The question caught her off guard. She met his eyes, uncertain. I do not know. It is hard to imagine leaving when so much here feels unfinished. Ethan nodded slowly. I feel the same. They continued walking, neither speaking for a while. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was heavy with awareness, full of words neither dared to say. When they reached the fountain, Lena sat on the edge, her reflection rippling in the water. Ethan, she said softly, if this all ends tomorrow, what will you tell your mother? He hesitated. The truth. That we were never really married? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. He looked down, his jaw tightening. That I was foolish enough to think I could make something real out of something false. The honesty in his voice shook her. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she said, maybe it is not false anymore. Ethan turned toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. Be careful with words like that, Lena. They can change everything. Maybe they are supposed to, she replied quietly. Before he could respond, a distant voice called from the terrace. It was the housekeeper, holding a phone. Mr. Carter, there is an urgent call from the office. They say it cannot wait. Ethan's expression hardened, and the fragile warmth between them broke. I will be right there. As he left, Lena watched him go, feeling the sudden emptiness that always followed his departure. The fountain gurgled softly beside her, its rhythm steady, indifferent. That afternoon, the quiet peace of the mansion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lena opened it to find a tall man in a dark suit, Mr. Graham, the chief financial officer. His expression was polite but cold. Good afternoon, Mrs. Carter, he said with a thin smile. Is your husband home? Lena straightened. He is at the office. I see, Graham said, stepping closer. Then perhaps you can help me. There have been some unusual financial transfers from the company's charity accounts recently. I am sure there is an explanation. Lena frowned. I would not know anything about that. He tilted his head slightly. Of course. Still, I find it interesting that those transfers began shortly after your marriage. Her stomach tightened. What are you implying? Nothing, Mrs. Carter, he said smoothly. Just that perception matters in business. And right now, the perception is that you are a distraction Mr. Carter cannot afford. Before she could answer, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Ethan appeared, his expression sharp. Graham, he said coolly, you seem to have forgotten that this is my home. Graham turned, unfazed. Just doing my job, sir. The board is nervous about changes in the foundation's spending. I thought I should see things for myself. You will see a termination letter instead, Ethan said firmly. Get out. For a moment, the two men stood face to face, the air charged with quiet hostility. Then Graham gave a short nod. As you wish. He turned toward Lena and smiled coldly. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Carter. I imagine we will see each other again soon. After he left, Ethan closed the door, his shoulders tense. Lena watched him, her heart pounding. "He was implying things about me," she said softly. "I know," Ethan replied. "He has been looking for a reason to discredit me for months. Do not take it personally." But she could see the strain in his face. "And if he tells others? Then we face it together," he said, his voice steady. "No one can make me doubt what I know to be true." Lena exhaled slowly, though her heart still raced. "You said that so easily." He met her eyes. "Because it is true." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the world outside, pressing against the fragile peace they had built. Somewhere beyond the walls, rumors and danger were already forming. But inside that house, under the soft light of the fading day, the only thing that felt real was the quiet trust between them, something stronger than the contract that had started it all. The next morning began with the sound of wind brushing through the trees outside the Carter estate. The early light poured softly through the curtains, pale and cold, and the stillness that filled the mansion felt heavier than usual, the calm before a storm. Lena was in the kitchen helping the staff prepare breakfast when she noticed the faint hum of conversation from the front hall. The butler entered moments later, his expression uneasy. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "there are reporters outside. They have been here since dawn." Lena froze. "Reporters? Why?" Before he could answer, Ethan's voice came from behind her. "Because Graham made his move." She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his tie loosened, eyes sharp but tired. "He sent the board copies of manipulated records," Ethan continued. "He made it look as though I used charity funds for personal gain. And he told them you were involved." Lena's stomach dropped. "That is not true." "I know," Ethan said, his tone firm. "But the story has already spread. The board wants a meeting this afternoon." Mrs. Carter entered then, leaning lightly on her cane. "Ethan, what is going on?" He forced a reassuring smile. "Nothing you need to worry about, Mother. Just company politics." She frowned. "I can tell when you are lying, Ethan. Please do not protect me from the truth." Ethan hesitated, then sighed softly. "Graham is trying to destroy everything Father built, but I will fix it." Lena stepped closer. "Let me help." He looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "No, this is my responsibility." But Lena's voice was steady. "It is our responsibility now. You said we would face it together." Ethan stared at her, the words echoing between them, then nodded once. "All right, together." By mid-afternoon, the mansion's calm had vanished. News vans lined the street, their cameras pointed toward the iron gates. The board meeting took place in the downtown office. But Lena stayed behind with Mrs. Carter, whose health had begun to waver again under the stress. Ethan returned hours later, his expression grim. The moment he stepped into the foyer, Lena knew the outcome. "They suspended me," he said quietly. "Until the investigation is complete." Lena felt her breath catch. "But it means the company will fall into Graham's hands temporarily." He rubbed his forehead. "He planned this perfectly. And now he is threatening to leak personal details to the media if we fight back." Mrs. Carter, standing nearby, pressed a hand to her chest. "Personal details? What kind of details?" Ethan hesitated, then looked at Lena. "He found out the truth about our marriage." The words landed like a stone. Lena felt her face go pale. "He knows it was a contract?" "Yes. He has copies of the agreement somehow. If he releases it, everything, Mother, the foundation, my reputation, will be destroyed." Mrs. Carter's voice trembled. "Is it true, Ethan? Was your marriage not real?" Ethan looked stricken. "Mother, please, let me explain." But she turned to Lena, her eyes filling with tears. "And you? Did you lie to me too?" Lena shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, Mrs. Carter. I never lied about caring for you. I just—" Mrs. Carter stepped back, her expression filled with hurt. "I trusted you both. I thought what I saw between you was real." "Mother," Ethan said, reaching out, "it is real. At least now it is. But the damage was done." Mrs. Carter turned away, her shoulders trembling. "Please, leave me alone." Lena felt the weight of guilt crush her chest as Ethan helped his mother back to her room. When he returned, his voice was low. "She will not even look at me." "Ah." Lena stood near the window, staring out at the flashing lights from the reporters' vans beyond the gates. "We should tell the truth before Graham does. That would ruin everything," he said quietly. "The company, the foundation, even the hospital that bears my father's name. I can handle losing all of that, but I cannot let my mother's last months be filled with humiliation." Lena turned to him, tears welling in her eyes. "So what do we do?" Ethan exhaled slowly, his face tightening with determination. "We fight, but not with lies. Graham will not win because of deceit. I will call an emergency press conference tomorrow. I will tell them the truth on my terms." Lena blinked in disbelief. "The truth? About everything?" "Yes," Ethan said, "including us." That night, the mansion was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. Lena sat in her room, unable to sleep. She could hear faint footsteps pacing the floor above Ethan, still awake, preparing for the battle ahead. She looked down at the gold ring on her finger. It had once felt like a symbol of obligation, but now it felt heavier, almost alive. She thought of Mrs. Carter's words. "Promise me you will not waste time being proud. Life is too short for walls." The next morning, Ethan stood before the mirror in his study, adjusting his tie. Lena entered quietly. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Ready enough." She stepped closer and reached out, straightening his collar. Her touch was gentle, deliberate. "Whatever happens out there, I am proud of you." He met her gaze. "For what?" "For being brave enough to choose truth." He held her eyes for a long moment before whispering, "Stay close today." "I will," she said softly. Outside, the sound of reporters grew louder as the car pulled away from the mansion. Ethan Carter was about to face a crowd hungry for scandal. But for the first time since their arrangement began, neither he nor Lena was pretending. They were walking into the storm, not as partners bound by contract, but as two people who had finally chosen to stand together even if the truth cost them everything. The next morning unfolded beneath a gray sky that seemed to press down over the city. The air was heavy, tense, the kind that carried the weight of something about to change. Ethan Carter stood before the wide glass windows of the conference hall, looking out at the line of cameras and microphones waiting beyond the doors. His reflection stared back at him, calm on the surface, but he could feel the storm inside. Behind him, Lena entered quietly. She had chosen a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back neatly. There was no glamour, no pretense, just quiet strength. When he turned to face her, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a kind of peace that had not been there before. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. "Yes," Ethan said. "If we keep running from the truth, then Graham wins." Lena nodded slowly. "Whatever happens, I will be beside you." He gave a small smile. "I know." They walked together toward the doors, where the sound of reporters' voices grew louder. As the doors opened, a wave of flashing lights burst through the hallway. Ethan paused for a brief moment, then stepped forward. Lena followed, her heart pounding with every step. The crowd surged. Questions shouted over one another. "Mr. Carter, did you misuse charity funds? Is it true your marriage was fake? Mrs. Carter, were you paid to pose as his wife?" Ethan raised a hand, silencing the noise. His voice, when it came, was steady. "There have been many rumors these past few days. Some of them are painful, and some of them are true. So I will tell you everything, myself." The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. He began. "Months ago, I entered into an agreement with Miss Lena Hayes. My mother was ill, and she believed that I was already engaged. I was desperate to ease her mind. So I made a choice, a selfish one. I asked Miss Hayes to pretend to be my wife." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras clicked like thunder. Ethan continued. "It was never meant to deceive the public or misuse company funds. The charity accounts remain intact and transparent. The only deception was personal mine." He glanced toward Lena. "And yet, what began as a lie became something else. Because the woman I asked to play, my wife taught me what honesty truly looks like." Lena felt her chest tighten. She had not expected him to say that, not here, not now. Ethan turned back to the cameras. "If this costs me my position, then so be it. But I will not let anyone destroy the name of a woman whose integrity saved both me and my family." The reporters erupted again, shouting questions. But his words had already shifted the room. The chaos sounded distant, like waves crashing far from shore. Lena stood still beside him, her hands clasped tightly, her heart aching with pride and fear. After the conference, they stepped outside to the waiting car. The moment the doors closed, silence enveloped them. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if releasing months of tension. "You were brave," Lena said quietly. "So were you," he replied. "Now we wait." The ride back to the mansion felt longer than usual. When they arrived, the gate was surrounded by journalists, but the guards cleared a path quickly. Inside, Mrs. Carter sat in the living room, her shawl around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "I watched it," she said as they entered. Ethan hesitated. "Mother," she raised a hand gently. "No need to explain. You already did that in front of the world." Lena stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, I never meant to hurt you." The older woman looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You did not hurt me, my dear. You gave me peace when I needed it most. And you gave my son something no one else could." She turned to Ethan. "You gave him back his heart." Ethan's throat tightened. "I thought I was protecting you." "You were," Mrs. Carter said softly. "But the truth protects us more than lies ever could." For a while no one spoke. The only sound was the rain beginning to fall again outside. Then Mrs. Carter reached for their hands and clasped them together. "Whatever happens with the company, with the world, promise me one thing. Do not let fear make your choices for you." Ethan nodded. "I promise." Lena's voice trembled slightly. "I promise too." That evening, the storm outside grew stronger, but inside the house, the air felt lighter. Ethan sat alone in the study, the fireplace casting warm light across the walls. Lena entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him, then sat on the edge of the desk. "You think they will forgive you?" she asked softly. "I do not know," he said, "but I can live with that. What I cannot live with anymore is pretending." Lena smiled gently. "That sounds like freedom." "Oh." He looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "It feels like it." For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. Then Ethan said quietly, "When this began, I thought I was hiring someone to help me lie. But somehow, you became the reason I wanted to tell the truth." Lena looked at him, her eyes soft. "And when this ends, what happens to us?" He hesitated, then said, "That depends on whether you still believe there is an us." "Ugh." She held his gaze for a long moment before whispering, "I do." The fire crackled, the storm outside roared, but inside the mansion, there was only stillness, the quiet recognition between 2 people who had found truth where they least expected it. For the first time, the contract that once bound them no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something real, fragile, and worth fighting for. The following morning arrived with a strange quiet that settled over the Carter mansion. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the sound of distant thunder rolled across the horizon. The storm from the night before had not yet passed, and neither had the storm brewing inside Ethan's life. The press conference had sent shockwaves through the city. Headlines filled every news outlet. "Ethan Carter admits contract marriage." Some called it courageous, others called it reckless. The board of directors remained silent, which was never a good sign. But for the first time in months, Ethan felt something close to relief. The truth was finally out. Lena sat at the breakfast table, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She could hear the faint rhythm of footsteps pacing in the hallway above Ethan's steady walk back and forth. He had barely slept. Neither had she. When he came downstairs, his expression was calm, but there was an edge of exhaustion in his eyes. "They have called an emergency board meeting for noon," he said quietly. "They are going to decide whether to remove me permanently." Lena set her cup down carefully. "Will they listen to you?" "I do not know," he admitted. "Graham has been feeding them fear for months. They think I am unstable, emotional. They think honesty makes me weak." Lena stood, her voice steady. "Then show them what strength really looks like." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, "because strength without truth is just pride, and pride does not last." He nodded slowly, then reached for his coat. "Stay here with my mother. I do not want her seeing any more of this chaos." "I will," Lena said, "but promise me something." "What?" "Promise me You will not let them make you ashamed of doing the right thing. Ugh. Ethan hesitated, then smiled faintly. I promise. By the time he arrived at the downtown headquarters, the building was surrounded by reporters. He walked past them without a word, his expression composed. Inside the boardroom, 10 members sat around a polished table, their faces unreadable. Graham sat among them, his posture relaxed, his smile thin and controlled. Mr. Carter, the chairman began, we have reviewed the footage of your press conference. While your honesty was admirable, it has created significant risk for the company's reputation. Ethan folded his hands calmly on the table. Sometimes reputation has to bend to truth. The company my father built was founded on integrity. That does not change, just because people are uncomfortable hearing it. Graham leaned forward slightly. Integrity is important, yes, but leadership requires sound judgment. Entering into a fake marriage, then confessing it on live television, is hardly sound judgment. Ethan met his gaze evenly. You mean it was not profitable judgment? That is not the same thing. The room fell silent. The chairman cleared his throat. You are still suspended until we complete a full review. In the meantime, Graham will continue as acting chief financial officer and interim executive. Ethan nodded slowly. Understood. He stood, smoothing his suit jacket. I will cooperate fully. But know this truth has a way of surviving lies. Eventually, everyone in this room will see who was really protecting this company. He turned and walked out, leaving the boardroom in uneasy silence. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Mrs. Carter rested in her chair near the window, her breathing light but steady. Lena sat beside her, sketching quietly to keep her nerves from unraveling. When Ethan returned that afternoon, the first thing he saw was his mother smiling weakly at him. You look tired, my son, she said softly, but also lighter. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand gently. I told them the truth again. They did not want to hear it, but I said it anyway. Mrs. Carter nodded, her eyes glistening. Your father would be proud. Lena stood quietly behind them, her heart swelling at the sight. She had never seen Ethan, this open, this human. That evening, as the sky darkened once more, Lena found Ethan alone in the garden. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and heavy with the scent of roses. He stood by the fountain, staring at the water's rippling surface. You did everything you could, she said softly as she approached. He turned to her, his face illuminated by the garden lights. I do not know if it will be enough. It is enough that you tried, she said. Sometimes doing what is right does not fix things. It just proves who you are. He studied her for a long moment. And who am I, Lena? She smiled faintly. Someone who stopped pretending. He exhaled slowly, his eyes softening. You make me want to be better. She stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. You already are. For a moment, the world seemed to hold still, the sound of the fountain, the rustle of leaves, the faint glow of light around them. It felt like the kind of peace that came only after surviving a storm. Then, from the terrace, they heard Mrs. Carter's voice calling faintly. Ethan turned quickly. Mother? She was standing at the doorway, clutching the frame for support. I am fine, she said weakly. I just wanted to see you both. I could not sleep knowing you were out here in the cold. Ethan hurried to her side. You should be resting. She smiled gently. I will rest when I know everything is as it should be. Lena approached, helping her back inside. Mrs. Carter sat down and looked at them both with warmth in her eyes. Whatever happens with your company, remember this money can be rebuilt. But hearts, once lost, are much harder to recover. Ethan kissed his mother's forehead. I know, Mother. Later that night, after Mrs. Carter had gone to bed, Lena lingered in the living room. Ethan stood by the fireplace, his silhouette framed by the golden glow of the flames. Tomorrow will bring whatever it brings, he said quietly. But tonight, I just want to remember that for once, I did not hide. Lena nodded, and I am proud of that. He turned to her with a small, tired smile. So am I. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time in a long while, the mansion did not feel like a place of secrets. It felt like home. The walls that once held silence now held something else entirely, the quiet promise of truth and the beginning of forgiveness. The following day began with a faint light that struggled through a curtain of fog. The Carter mansion was quiet, too quiet, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan had left early for the office, determined to face the consequences of the board's decision. Lena remained behind, helping Mrs. Carter with breakfast and trying to keep the air calm despite the unease pressing at her chest. Mrs. Carter could feel it too. As Lena poured tea, the older woman said softly, "Something about today feels heavier, does it not?" Lena gave a small nod. "Yes, I think it is because everything is uncertain now." Mrs. Carter reached across the table, resting her frail hand on Lena's. "Uncertainty is not the same as hopelessness, my dear. It just means the story is not finished yet." Those words stayed with Lena all morning. She tidied the sunroom, watered the plants, and checked her phone every few minutes, waiting for a message from Ethan. The silence stretched longer with every passing hour. By mid-afternoon, the waiting became unbearable. She stood by the window, watching the road beyond the gates, hoping to see his car. Instead, she saw the black sedan that belonged to Mr. Graham. It stopped just outside the fence, and two men stepped out. One of them carried a folder. They spoke briefly to the guard before leaving the envelope behind. Lena's pulse quickened. She hurried downstairs as the butler brought the envelope into the house. "This just arrived for Mr. Carter," he said. "Thank you," Lena replied, taking it carefully. Her instinct told her not to wait. She opened it. Inside were printed pages, documents stamped with the Carter Corporation seal, and a note written in sharp, confident handwriting. "The board has voted. Ethan Carter is officially removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I will ensure the transition is as painless as possible. Tell him this is what happens when emotions cloud judgment." The note was signed, Graham. Lena's breath caught. The words felt cold, final. She closed the folder slowly, her heart pounding. Mrs. Carter, who had been resting in the next room, looked up when she saw Lena's face. "What is it, child?" Lena swallowed hard. "It is the board. They have taken the company from him." Mrs. Carter's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the papers. "Let me see." She read the letter in silence, her expression tightening with each line. When she looked up again, her eyes were clear but full of sorrow. "That man Graham, he has no idea what he has destroyed." Lena felt anger burn through her chest, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Ethan does not deserve this. Not after everything he has done to make things right." Mrs. Carter gave a slow nod. "Go to him. Do not let him face this alone." Lena hesitated. "Are you sure? You should not be alone either." "I will be fine," Mrs. Carter said firmly. "But my son needs someone to remind him that this loss is not the end." "Oh." Lena took a deep breath, grabbed her coat, and hurried out to the car. The drive into the city felt endless, every red light a test of patience. When she finally arrived at the office, she saw Ethan standing in the lobby, his shoulders stiff, his tie loosened. His team moved quietly around him, avoiding eye contact. She approached slowly. "Ethan." He turned, and she saw in his eyes the exhaustion of a man who had been holding everything together for too long. "You should not be here," he said softly. "I had to be," she replied. "I know about the letter." He nodded once, a hollow laugh escaping him. "It is official then. Graham has the company. The board voted him in. Everything my father built, everything I protected, it is all gone." Lena stepped closer. "Not everything. You still have your integrity. You still have your mother. You still have me." He looked at her, and for the first time, his composure cracked. "It feels like failure." "It is not failure," she said firmly. "It is injustice. And injustice does not last forever." He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the floor. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was strong enough to carry his legacy. And now it feels like I was never strong enough at all." Lena shook her head. "Strength is not measured by what you keep, Ethan. It is measured by what you refuse to lose. And you have not lost yourself." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said quietly. "Because I have seen the man you are when no one else is watching. You fight for what is right, even when it costs you everything." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly and nodded. "You always know what to say." "I just say what is true," she replied. He gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Come on, let's get out of here." They left the building together. Outside, the city buzzed with life, as if unaware that one man's world had just collapsed. As they reached the car, a few reporters called out questions. But Ethan ignored them. Lena followed silently until they were safely inside. The drive home was quiet. The rain began again, streaking the windows with silver lines. When they reached the mansion, Mrs. Carter was waiting by the window. She opened the door herself before they could knock. "Mother?" Ethan said softly, his voice strained. "It is over." She reached for his hand. "No, my son. It is not over. Sometimes life takes away what we build to remind us that we are more than what we own." Ethan pulled her into a gentle hug, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to make you proud." Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "You already have." Lena stood quietly nearby, her heart heavy and full all at once. The storm outside continued to fall, but inside the house there was warmth, fragile, flickering, but real. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the documents Graham had sent. Lena entered quietly and placed a steaming cup of tea beside him. He looked up, his voice low. "Do you ever wonder why things fall apart, even when you do everything right?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe so that something better has space to begin." He looked at her for a long time, and for the first time since losing the company, he smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. And in that moment, Ethan Carter understood that while his empire had fallen, something far greater was rising in its place, the quiet strength of truth, love, and the courage to start again. The next morning broke with a pale light that carried no warmth. The storm had passed, but the air outside the Carter mansion still felt heavy, as though the world itself was waiting to see what Ethan would do next. Lena awoke early, the faint scent of coffee drifting through the hall. When she entered the kitchen, she found Ethan already there, sitting at the table with a folder open in front of him. He looked composed, but there was a quiet weight in his posture. "You did not sleep," she said softly. He shook his head. "I could not. I kept thinking about what comes next." Lena poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him. "And have you decided?" Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yes. I am not going to fight Graham anymore. He can have the company if that is what he wants." Lena frowned. "You are just giving up?" "No," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I am walking away before the fight turns me into what I hate. My father built that company for good reasons, but it became something else. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my worth depended on it. It is time I learn how to live without it." Lena listened in silence, studying his face. There was sadness there, yes, but also something new: clarity. "What will you do instead?" He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Something real, something that actually matters. My mother's art foundation, the one you helped her design, it has potential. I want to expand it, give it the attention it deserves. Maybe that is the legacy I'm meant to build." Lena smiled softly. "That sounds like something your father would have been proud of." Ethan's expression softened. "Maybe. But this time, I will build it differently. No lies, no contracts." Their eyes met, and neither spoke for a while. The quiet between them was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited his mother's room. Mrs. Carter was resting, sunlight spilling across her blanket. She smiled when she saw him. "You look lighter today," she said. "I think I finally understand what you meant," he replied. "About what?" she asked. "About letting go of what you cannot keep." Mrs. Carter's eyes glistened. "Ah, yes. It took me half a lifetime to learn that. I am glad you learned it sooner." He took her hand gently. "I am going to step away from the company, Mother. Graham can have it. I want to focus on something that feels honest." She squeezed his hand weakly. "That is all I ever wanted for you, to live honestly, not perfectly." When he left her room, he found Lena in the hallway, waiting. "How is she?" she asked. "Peaceful," he said quietly. "She understands." "Oh." They walked together through the garden. The roses were still wet from the rain, their petals bending gently under the weight of water. The scent of earth filled the air. Lena looked up at him. "So, this is a new beginning?" "Yes," he said. "A different one. Smaller, maybe, but real." She smiled. "Then it is the right kind." He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when this started, I thought you were just a solution to a problem." "And now?" she asked. "Now you are the only thing that makes sense," he said softly. The words hung between them, honest and quiet. Lena's heart tightened, not with fear, but with something steady and certain. "Then let us build something that lasts not out of duty, but choice." Ethan nodded. Together, the afternoon light stretched long across the garden, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like pretending. The storms, the lies, the weight of expectation, they had all led to this moment of stillness. Ethan Carter had lost his empire, but as he looked at the woman beside him, he realized he had finally found his freedom. The following weeks moved more quietly than anyone expected. Without the noise of reporters, meetings, or endless phone calls, the Carter mansion finally began to feel like a home again. The house no longer echoed with tension. Instead, there was laughter from the garden, the sound of brushes against canvas, and the soft clinking of teacups in the afternoons. Ethan kept his promise. He devoted himself fully to rebuilding the art foundation, not as a business project, but as a living space for healing. The first initiative he launched was a community program for underprivileged children, offering them free art classes and therapy sessions. Lena helped design the curriculum, and Mrs. Carter, though still frail, insisted on attending the planning meetings, her eyes glowing with pride each time her son spoke. One morning, Ethan and Lena stood in the large, sunlit room that would soon serve as the foundation's art studio. The smell of fresh paint and new wood filled the air. Easels lined the walls, and sunlight poured across the floor. "It feels alive," Lena said softly, running her hand along one of the tables. Ethan smiled faintly. "It should. It is the first thing I have built without worrying about profit margins." Lena turned to him. "You built it with heart instead of numbers. That is worth more than anything." He looked at her, the warmth in his gaze quiet but steady. "You were the reason I learned how." Lena blushed slightly but did not look away. "Then we learned together." That afternoon, they hosted a small open house for the community. Families arrived with curious children, some shy, some bubbling with excitement. Lena guided them through the rooms, showing them the supplies, while Ethan spoke with parents about scholarships and classes. At one point, a little girl stopped in front of a blank canvas and asked shyly, "Can I paint anything I want?" Lena knelt beside her, smiling. "You can paint whatever you feel. There are no rules here." The girl's face brightened. "Even the sky purple?" "Especially the sky purple," Lena said with a gentle laugh. Ethan watched from across the room, the moment etching itself quietly into his heart. For the first time in years, he felt no weight of expectation, only gratitude. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone, the house was filled with the faint smell of turpentine and the soft hum of the evening breeze. Mrs. Carter sat in her favorite chair by the window, her hands resting on a blanket. "I saw the children smiling," she said softly, as Ethan poured her a cup of tea. "It reminded me of you when you were small." He smiled faintly. "I think I finally understand what Father meant when he said success means nothing without purpose." Mrs. Carter looked at him, her eyes tender. "And do you know your purpose now?" He turned toward Lena, who stood at the far end of the room, adjusting the curtains, unaware of his gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I do." That night, as the house grew still, Ethan found Lena in the garden, under the dim glow of the lanterns. The roses had begun to bloom again, filling the air with their sweet scent. She turned when she heard him. "You cannot sleep either?" He shook his head. "Too many thoughts. Good ones, I hope." "Mostly," he said, stepping closer. "I was thinking about how everything started with a lie, and somehow led me to the truest thing I have ever known." Lena smiled softly. "Life has a strange way of leading us where we belong." He nodded slowly. "I just never expected where I belonged would be here with you." The silence that followed was gentle, full of understanding. The lantern light reflected softly in her eyes, and for the first time, Ethan did not feel the need to fill the silence with promises or plans. The truth between them was already enough. In the distance, the wind rustled through the garden, carrying with it the scent of roses and the soft echo of laughter from the children earlier that day. And beneath that night sky, for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Carter was not a businessman or a fallen millionaire. He was simply a man who had found peace. The next morning brought sunlight that spilled softly through the windows, filling the Carter mansion with quiet warmth. The scent of coffee drifted through the halls, and for the first time in months, there was no tension, no dread of headlines or meetings, only calm. Ethan had begun to find rhythm in this new life, one not defined by power but by purpose. Lena entered the kitchen to find him already there, sorting through stacks of papers related to the foundation. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled, and for once he looked content rather than burdened. "You are working again," she said gently, setting a small vase of roses on the counter. He looked up with a faint smile. "This does not feel like work. It feels like something alive." "Ugh." Lena poured tea and sat across from him. "How are the new applications?" "Over 50 in 2 days," he replied, his voice almost disbelieving. "Half of them are from single mothers, trying to find creative outlets for their kids. The other half are young artists who just want a place to belong." Lena's smile widened. "Then you have built exactly what was missing from this city." Ethan looked at her, his tone soft. "No, we built it." "Oh." For a moment, silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the ticking clock. It was not uncomfortable, it was the kind of silence that said everything words could not. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Carter joined them in the garden. Her strength had returned in small but noticeable ways. The sunlight caught the silver in her hair as she sat beneath the arbor, sketching the roses in her lap. "I never thought I would live to see my son at peace," she said softly, glancing toward Ethan. He chuckled lightly. "Peace is still a work in progress." Mrs. Carter looked at Lena with a knowing smile. "Then it is a good thing. He has the right partner to remind him what matters." Lena blushed, lowering her eyes, but Ethan did not look away. "She does more than remind me," he said. "She holds me accountable." The older woman laughed gently, her voice light as the breeze. "Then she is perfect for you." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Lena walked together along the garden path. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the air filled with the hum of crickets. The foundation's first official opening was scheduled for the next week, and everything was ready. "You know," Lena said, her voice thoughtful, "when I first met you, I never imagined we would end up here." Ethan smiled faintly. "Neither did I. I was a man pretending to be in control of everything, and you were the one thing I could not predict." Lena laughed softly. "I think that is the only time being unpredictable worked in my favor." He stopped walking, turning toward her. "Lena, when I lost the company, I thought it was the end of everything I had built, but it was the beginning of everything I actually needed." She met his gaze, her expression gentle. "Sometimes we have to lose what is hollow to make room for what is real." He took a slow breath. "You changed my life." "And you changed mine?" she replied. "Not because of what you had, but because of who you chose to become." For a moment they simply stood there, surrounded by the golden light of the fading day. The world felt quiet, suspended in that small, honest space between them. Inside the house, Mrs. Carter watched from the window, a faint smile touching her lips. She saw the way Ethan looked at Lena with a calm certainty that could only come from love earned, not given by chance. The evening wind rustled through the roses, scattering a few petals along the path. As they fell, Lena reached out to catch one and held it between her fingers. "It is beautiful," she said. Ethan looked at her, his voice soft. "So are you." "Alu." And in that simple moment, no contracts, no cameras, no lies. The story that had begun as an act of desperation quietly became what it was always meant to be. A story of two hearts, learning that love, when built on truth, is the most lasting legacy of all. The week of the foundation's grand opening arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze. The morning light poured through the tall windows of the Carter mansion, touching everything with a golden calm. It was the first major public event since Ethan's resignation, and though his name still appeared in newspapers, the headlines had shifted. The tone was no longer scandal but admiration. Former CEO rebuilds hope through art. Ethan stood by the mirror in his study, adjusting his tie. He looked the same, yet different. No longer the untouchable businessman who hid behind his reputation, but a man grounded in purpose. Lena appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple cream-colored dress. Her hair was tied loosely, her smile warm and calm. "You look ready," she said softly. He turned, smiling faintly. "Ready, but nervous. It feels different from facing shareholders." "That is because this time you are speaking from the heart," Lena replied. "People can tell the difference. Mrs. Carter joined them soon after, walking slowly but steady with her cane. Her eyes sparkled with pride. "You two have done something remarkable," she said. "Your father would have been proud of both of you." Ethan offered her his arm. "Then let us make sure today is worthy of him." By late morning, the foundation's hall was filled with light chatter and music. Guests mingled among displays of children's artwork, bright splashes of color painted across the walls. Reporters moved carefully, respectful now, capturing photos of laughter instead of scandal. Ethan took the stage beside Lena. The crowd grew quiet. He paused for a moment, looking out at the faces, families, children, old colleagues, and even strangers who had come to see what redemption looked like. "When this foundation began," he started, "it was supposed to be just another project, another line on a list of achievements. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. It became a lesson." He glanced toward Lena before continuing. "I learned that success means very little if it costs your honesty. And I learned that rebuilding does not always mean returning to what was lost. Sometimes, it means starting over with new values, new purpose, and new people to believe in." Lena watched him speak, her heart swelling with quiet pride. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew louder, filling the room with warmth. Mrs. Carter clapped too, tears in her eyes. After the speeches, guests wandered through the gallery. Children painted on open canvases, laughing freely. One boy approached Ethan shyly, holding a small sketch. "I made this for you," he said. Ethan knelt, taking the picture carefully. It was a simple drawing, a man, a woman, and a child, standing under a tree labeled "Home." "It is beautiful," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." When the boy ran off, Lena stepped beside him, looking at the drawing. "He drew what this place means," she said quietly. "It is not just an art center anymore. It is hope." Ethan nodded. "That is all I ever wanted it to be." As the evening light began to fade, the guests slowly departed. The hall emptied until only Ethan, Lena, and Mrs. Carter remained. The old woman looked around the quiet room, her expression peaceful. "It feels complete now," she whispered. Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "Rest now, Mother. We will take it from here." Mrs. Carter smiled softly. "You already have." Later, outside the building, Lena and Ethan stood beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. The city stretched before them, alive and calm. Ethan turned to her. "I never thought losing everything could lead me here." Lena's voice was gentle. "Sometimes you have to lose the world to find where you belong." He took her hand, his grip steady. "Then I am exactly where I should be." Oh. Under the quiet hum of the city, with the stars faintly visible above, Ethan Carter finally felt the weight of his past lift completely. What had begun as a contract built on lies had become the foundation of a life built on truth, and for the first time, both of them could see the future clearly. The days following the foundation's grand opening felt like the calm after a long, relentless storm. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive. For once, the name Ethan Carter appeared in headlines not for scandal or wealth, but for compassion and renewal. The mansion, once a symbol of power and isolation, had become a place of community, an open home where people came and left with lighter hearts. Every morning, Ethan would walk through the garden with his mother, helping her to the bench near the fountain. The roses were in full bloom again, glowing red and gold beneath the early light. Mrs. Carter's health was fragile but stable, and her smile carried a peace that had not been there before. "You look different lately," she said one morning, as he adjusted her blanket. "Older?" he teased softly. She chuckled. "Wiser, happier, maybe both." Ethan smiled faintly. "I think it is because I finally understand what matters. I used to chase success thinking it would make me feel whole. But what fills me now is not success, it is purpose." "Mrs. Carter looked up at him with warmth in her eyes. "And love?" He hesitated, glancing toward the open doors where Lena stood, arranging art supplies for the children's next class. "And love," he said quietly. That afternoon, the foundation was buzzing with laughter. Dozens of children filled the art room, painting, sculpting, and experimenting with color. Lena guided them patiently, her voice calm and encouraging. Ethan watched from the doorway, the corners of his mouth lifting as he saw how naturally she belonged here. One of the little boys tugged at Lena's sleeve. Miss Lena, can Mr. Carter paint too? Lena turned, smiling. You will have to ask him yourself. The boy ran over. Mr. Carter, come paint with us. Ethan laughed softly. I am not very good at painting. Neither are we, the boy said brightly. That is why it is fun. Lena handed him a brush, her eyes playful. No escaping this one, Ethan. He sighed in mock defeat and sat beside the children. The first few strokes were awkward, his lines uneven. But soon, something shifted. The simplicity of the act, the quiet joy of creating without agenda, calmed him. When he finished, his canvas showed a rough sketch of the garden outside, sunlight breaking through the clouds. One of the children looked at it and said, "It looks like hope." Ethan blinked, surprised by the words. He turned to Lena, who smiled gently. "It does," she said softly. "It really does." Later that evening, after the children had gone and the house was quiet, Ethan walked into the kitchen to find Lena washing brushes. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair slightly messy, and her face glowing from the day's energy. "You were amazing today," he said. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "So were you. You made those kids feel seen." "I think they did the same for me," he admitted. "When I was their age, I did not think there was room for mistakes. Everything had to be perfect." Lena turned off the faucet and faced him. "Maybe that is why you understand them so well now. You know what it feels like to carry too much weight too early." Ethan leaned against the counter, studying her face. "You always seem to know what to say." "That is because I am talking to someone who finally listens," she replied with a small smile. They stood there for a moment in quiet understanding. The air between them felt light, not from lack of feeling, but from a peace born of honesty. Suddenly, Mrs. Carter's voice called faintly from the living room. "Ethan, Lena, come here." They hurried in to find her sitting in her chair, holding an envelope. Her eyes shone with quiet excitement. "A letter came this afternoon," she said, "from the board of Carter Enterprises." Ethan frowned slightly. "What do they want now?" "Read it," she said, handing it to him. He opened it carefully. The words were brief but clear. "The board acknowledges the positive impact of your foundation and your recent public efforts. We wish to reinstate you as a consultant to oversee corporate social initiatives." The decision was unanimous. Ethan stared at the letter in silence. Lena watched him, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Carter smiled proudly. "They finally see what your father saw in you." "Oh," but Ethan only shook his head slowly. "No, Mother, I cannot go back." Lena's brows furrowed. "Why not?" He looked up, his voice calm but firm. "Because the man I was when I ran that company does not exist anymore. Going back would mean pretending again. And I do not want to live pretending ever again." Mrs. Carter nodded slowly, her smile soft. "Then you have truly found yourself, my son." Ethan folded the letter and set it on the table. "I will thank them, but my place is here now with both of you, and with what we are building." Lena felt something tighten gently in her chest, pride, affection, and the quiet certainty that they were standing at the edge of something lasting. Outside, the first stars began to appear, faint but steady in the evening sky. As Ethan turned off the lights, the soft glow from the foundation's windows illuminated the path leading to the garden. The empire that once defined him had fallen, but what stood in its place was far stronger, not made of steel and glass, but of kindness, forgiveness, and the simple courage to begin again. The next morning arrived with the soft light of dawn spreading slowly across the garden. The roses glistened with dew, and the air smelled of new beginnings. Inside the mansion, the sound of quiet footsteps echoed through the hall. Lena was already awake, setting the breakfast table. The house had found a rhythm again, calm, steady, and full of quiet purpose. Ethan joined her soon after, still wearing his morning robe, a faint trace of sleep in his eyes. "You are up early again," he said with a small smile. "So are you," Lena replied. "I made coffee. I thought you could use some." He poured himself a cup, the steam curling softly in the golden light. "You always seem to know what I need before I do." Lena smiled. "That is what happens when you spend too much time with someone." Ethan laughed gently, then grew quiet. "Lena, about yesterday, the letter from the board. I meant what I said. I will not go back." "I know," she said, "and I agree." He looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. Because the man you are now does not belong in that world anymore. You have built something different. Something honest. He nodded slowly, a quiet gratitude in his expression. Then we will keep building. They ate breakfast together, in peaceful silence. Through the window, the foundation building stood tall in the morning light, its glass windows reflecting the sky. It was no longer just a project, it had become the heartbeat of everything they stood for. Later that day, the foundation hosted a small gathering for the new students. It was informal, just art, laughter, and stories. Ethan walked among the children, helping them mix paints and hang their finished pieces on the wall. His mother sat nearby, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes bright with joy as she watched the life around her. At one point, Lena noticed a teenage boy standing off to the side, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at a blank canvas. She approached him gently. "Not painting today?" The boy shrugged. "I am not good at it. That is what everyone says before they try," she said softly. He glanced up at her. "Even you?" She smiled. "Especially me." He hesitated, then picked up a brush. His first strokes were hesitant, but soon his hand began to move more confidently. Ethan watched from across the room, his heart warming at the sight. It reminded him why he had chosen this path, because even one spark of belief could change a life. When the event ended, the foundation was filled with colorful canvases and the faint sound of laughter that lingered like music. As the last guest left, Ethan and Lena stayed behind to clean up. "That boy you helped," Ethan said, stacking brushes. "You saw something in him." Lena nodded. "I just saw someone who needed to be told he could try." Ethan's voice softened. "You have that effect on people on me, too." She looked at him, a little shyly. "Maybe that is what love is. Seeing someone not for who they were, but for who they could be." He held her gaze for a moment, the truth of her words settling deep inside him. "If that is true, then you have loved me since the day we met." Lena laughed softly, her cheeks flushing. "Maybe I have." Before either could say more, a sound from the hallway interrupted them, a soft cough. Then Mrs. Carter's voice. "You two can stop pretending now," she said warmly as she entered the room. "The entire city can see how you look at each other." Ethan turned, embarrassed but smiling. "Mother," she waved her hand. "Do not mother me. I may be old, but I am not blind." Lena's face turned pink as Mrs. Carter continued, her tone gentle. "Love like this does not come from contracts or circumstance. It grows because it is real." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Mrs. Carter looked between them with that quiet authority that always commanded respect. "I want you both to promise me something." Ethan stepped closer. "Anything." "Promise me that when I am gone, you will not retreat back into your old walls," she said softly. "Do not let grief make you small again. Keep living, keep loving. That will be my peace." Ethan's eyes glistened. "You are not going anywhere, Mother." Mrs. Carter smiled knowingly. "We all go somewhere eventually. What matters is what we leave behind." She reached for Lena's hand and placed it gently over Ethan's. "You both have already built something that will last longer than any company ever could." Lena's voice trembled slightly. "We promise." Ethan nodded. "We promise." That night, after Mrs. Carter had gone to rest, Ethan and Lena stood together on the terrace. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the scent of roses drifted through the air. "She is right," Ethan said quietly. "We have built something that matters." Lena leaned against him, her voice soft. "And we are just getting started." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The night was calm, the stars faint but clear. The mansion that once symbolized loneliness now felt alive. A home filled with truth, love, and the echo of promises made under the quiet breath of the wind. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter did not feel the need to chase anything. He had already found everything he had been searching for right there, beside him. The seasons began to change, and with them, life in the Carter mansion found a new rhythm. The roses in the garden shifted from crimson to pale gold, their petals fluttering away with the autumn breeze. The air carried the scent of rain and wood smoke, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the foundation every afternoon. It had been 3 months since the grand opening. The community center had grown faster than Ethan and Lena ever expected. Donations poured in, Volunteers offered their time, and artists from across the city came to teach. The rooms that were once silent were now filled with life, color, and hope. Every morning, Ethan walked the garden path with his mother before leaving for the foundation. Mrs. Carter had grown weaker, but her spirit was undimmed. She insisted on sitting by the window where she could see the children playing outside. "It makes me feel young again," she would say. One morning, as the first leaves began to fall, she looked at Ethan and smiled. "You know, my son, peace looks good on you," he smiled faintly. Peace was harder to earn than wealth ever was. Mrs. Carter reached for his hand. "That is why it is worth more." Later that day, Ethan arrived at the foundation to find Lena in the main hall, surrounded by children holding paintbrushes. She was laughing as they argued over who had spilled blue paint on the floor. "It was him!" one boy shouted, pointing at his friend. "It was an accident," the other insisted. Lena raised her hands, smiling. "Then it sounds like everyone here owes the floor an apology." The children laughed, the tension broken instantly. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her with quiet admiration. It was a sight that never stopped grounding him, her ability to turn chaos into calm, her kindness that seemed to fill every corner of the room. When she noticed him, her smile softened. "You are early today." "I finished the reports," he said, "and I thought I would come here instead of staring at numbers." "Good choice," Lena replied. "The numbers are important, but this is the part that matters." Oh. Together, they helped the children clean up, and when the last one had left, Ethan looked at the wall where dozens of paintings now hung. Each one was signed with a child's name, bursts of color and hope, messy but alive. Lena stood beside him. "Every brushstroke here tells a story," she said softly. "And you gave them that voice?" Ethan replied. "You gave them the courage to create." She shook her head gently. "We both did." That evening, they returned to the mansion. Mrs. Carter was sitting by the fire, her sketchbook open on her lap. She had been drawing again, her lines delicate but sure. "You two look tired," she said, smiling. "But in a good way." Ethan sat beside her. "We had a full house today." "Good," she said. "That means people are finding their way to something beautiful." Lena sat on the rug near her chair, looking at the unfinished sketch. "You are still working on the garden?" Mrs. Carter nodded. "It is never really finished, is it? There is always something growing, something fading." She looked at them both. "That is how love works too." Her words lingered in the air, gentle but certain. The next few weeks passed quietly. The leaves turned golden, and the days grew shorter. Ethan spent most of his time at the foundation, while Lena began preparing for a winter art showcase featuring the children's work. The entire community was invited. One evening, as Lena finalized the layout in the main hall, she received a call from the mansion. It was the housekeeper, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Hayes, it is Mrs. Carter. She is asking for you and Mr. Carter. She says she would like to see you both tonight." Lena felt her chest tighten. "We will come right away." When they arrived, the house was quiet, the air heavy with the soft scent of lavender and candlelight. Mrs. Carter was resting in her bed, her hands folded over her blanket. Her breathing was steady but faint. Ethan sat beside her immediately, taking her hand. "Mother, we are here." She smiled weakly. "I know. I just wanted to see you both together. I wanted to say thank you." Lena's voice trembled. "For what?" "For giving this house its laughter back," Mrs. Carter whispered. "For giving my son something money could never buy." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You gave that to me first." "Oh." She looked at them both, her voice soft but strong. "When your father passed, I prayed you would one day learn that love is not about perfection or power. It is about choosing kindness every day. You both have done that." Lena felt tears sting her eyes. "You taught us how." Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "Then I can rest knowing you will carry that lesson forward." The room grew quiet again. The sound of the fire crackling filled the silence. Ethan sat still, holding her hand until her breathing steadied into a peaceful rhythm. Later that night, Lena found him standing alone in the garden, the cold air brushing against his face. The roses had begun to lose their petals, but they still glowed faintly in the moonlight. "She is resting," Lena said softly, stepping beside him. He nodded, his voice low. "She has always been the strongest person I know." Lena reached for his hand. "She still is." Oh. They stood there together, surrounded by the quiet hum of the night. The foundation, the garden, the home, everything they had rebuilt now carried her touch, her lessons, her love. And though the future felt uncertain again, Ethan knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever came next, they would face it not as people pretending to be perfect, but as two souls who had learned, through loss and truth, how to live honestly and how to love fully. The winter sun rose gently over the Carter mansion, turning the frost-covered garden into a field of silver. The air was cold but still, and inside the house, everything was quiet. A new day had begun, yet it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Lena walked down the long hallway, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the warmth steadying her trembling fingers. She stopped at Mrs. Carter's door, hesitated, and then stepped inside. Ethan was already there, sitting beside the bed. His mother was resting peacefully, her breathing slow but calm. The morning light touched her face, soft and golden. "She is still sleeping," he said quietly, his voice steady but tired. Lena set the cup down and touched his shoulder gently. "You should rest for a while. You have been here all night." He shook his head. "I want to stay." She always used to say mornings were her favorite. "I do not want her to wake up alone." Lena said nothing. She simply sat beside him, their hands brushing lightly but not separating. For a while, they listened to the rhythm of the house, the faint crackle of the fireplace, the distant hum of the wind. Then, Mrs. Carter stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, a faint smile crossing her lips as she saw them. "You two look tired," she whispered, her voice softer than ever. Ethan smiled faintly. "You always notice everything." Mrs. Carter's gaze drifted toward the window, where sunlight spilled through the curtains. "It is a beautiful morning," she said. "It feels like peace." Lena leaned closer. "Would you like some tea?" Mrs. Carter shook her head gently. "No, my dear. Just stay. That is all I need." They sat with her in silence for a while. Then, with the smallest of sighs, Mrs. Carter said, "Promise me something." "Anything," Ethan said immediately. "Promise me you will not let this house go dark again," she whispered. "Keep it filled with laughter. Keep it alive." Ethan's voice caught slightly. "I promise." "And you, Lena," Mrs. Carter said, turning to her with a faint but knowing smile. "Promise me you will keep him grounded. He has his father's drive. But your kindness gives it direction." Lena felt tears gather in her eyes. "I promise." Mrs. Carter smiled one last time. "Good. Then my work here is done." The light outside grew brighter, and her breathing slowed. Ethan held her hand tightly, but she did not stir again. The room was quiet, filled only with the faint sound of the wind moving through the garden, gentle, eternal. When the doctor arrived later that morning, there was nothing left to do but confirm what they already knew. Mrs. Carter had passed peacefully, surrounded by love. The following days moved like a dream, quiet, heavy, and full of remembrance. The funeral was small, attended by close friends, former employees, and families whose lives Mrs. Carter had touched through her years of quiet generosity. Ethan spoke briefly, his voice calm but full of emotion. "My mother taught me that strength has nothing to do with power," he said. "It is about compassion, patience, and truth. She lived her life, believing kindness could change the world, and I think she was right. Everything good I have done began with her." "Oh." Lena stood beside him the entire time, her presence steady and grounding. When the final words were spoken and the last flowers laid, they returned to the mansion, where the quiet felt deeper than before. That night, Ethan sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. The shadows flickered across his face, and his expression was unreadable. Lena entered the room silently, carrying 2 cups of tea. "She would not want you to sit here alone," she said softly. He looked up at her, his eyes distant. "Everything feels so empty without her voice in the house." Lena set the cups down and sat beside him. "It does not have to stay empty. You can fill it again with her memory, with what she believed in." He exhaled slowly. "You always make it sound simple." "Not simple," she said gently. "Just possible." For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ethan reached for her hand, his voice quiet but sure. "She told us to keep the house alive. I want to honor that, but not just with the foundation. I want to honor it with life, with family. with everything she dreamed of for us. Lena's heart began to race. What are you saying? He turned to her fully, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. I am saying that this started as a contract, but it became the most real thing I have ever known. I do not want a life without you, Lena. Not now, not ever. Her breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan, he smiled softly, stay with me. Not as my partner in work, but as my partner in life. Lena could not speak. Instead, she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. For the first time, there was no distance between them, no hesitation, no boundaries built by fear. Outside, the wind moved through the roses, carrying the faint scent of winter blossoms into the room. In the months that followed, the mansion changed once more. The walls that had witnessed grief and deception now echoed with warmth and renewal. The art foundation expanded, offering scholarships in Mrs. Carter's name. Her old studio became a gallery for the children's paintings, each one carrying a small plaque that read, "Kindness grows here." Ethan and Lena worked side by side, their partnership effortless and strong. They spent mornings in the garden, afternoons teaching, and evenings walking through the city that had once judged him, now celebrating him for his courage to change. Every year, on the anniversary of Mrs. Carter's passing, they held an event at the foundation. The children performed, families gathered, and the night always ended with a soft melody played on the piano, the same one Ethan had once avoided for years. Lena would sit beside him as he played, her hand resting lightly on his. One evening, as the hall emptied and the laughter faded into the night, Ethan looked around and whispered, "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" Lena smiled. Every day. He looked at her then, the woman who had entered his life by chance and stayed by choice, and said quietly, "You kept your promise." She tilted her head. "Which one?" "You kept this house alive." She smiled gently. "So did you." "Oh." The lights dimmed slowly, and the sound of the piano faded into the quiet hum of the city. The garden outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, the roses blooming even in the chill of winter. And there, in the home that had once been built on illusion, love had taken root steady, patient, and real. Ethan Carter, once the man who thought wealth could fix everything, had discovered the truth his mother had always known, that the greatest riches were never measured in power or success, but in the hearts we touch and the lives we heal. Lena stood beside him, her head resting gently on his shoulder, and in the warmth of that quiet night, both of them knew the story that had begun as a contract had ended as a promise fulfilled. A promise to live truthfully, a promise to love without condition, a promise to keep kindness alive. And in that promise, they had found forever.